Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brenda Harvin Forte. I'm a member of the Oakland Police Commission, and am chair of the ad hoc on the Oakland Police Department's anti-discrimination policy. I want to welcome everyone to this public forum this afternoon. I'm going to introduce a few people in a moment, and then I'm going to tell everyone what this ad hoc is about, what it's tasked with. And then we're going to hear from some what we call subject matter experts as we talk about the policy. We will then hear from Lieutenant Turner, who has been from the Oakland Police Department, who has been shepherding this policy through in terms of the edits and drafts and everything else. And we will then have a discussion from him. We will then open it up to the public for comments. I want to introduce first the other commissioners who are serving on this ad hoc. That is Commissioner Jesse Shay, as well as Commissioner Regina Jackson. I want to introduce the other people on the panel who will be presenting this evening. We have Director Darlene Flynn. She is the Director of the Department of Race and Equity for the City of Oakland. We also have Catherine Massey, who is with the Oakland City Attorney's Office. She handles employment investigations and civil rights compliance. And we have Attorney Tanetta Thompson, who is counsel to and director of recruitment for San Francisco's Department of Police Accountability. The ad hoc members who helped us in trying to get this policy drafted are the following. We're fortunate to have members of the city of Oakland, representatives of the city of Oakland, as well as representatives from the Oakland Police Department. And with respect to the Oakland Police Department, I want to welcome Deputy Chief Wong, who is here, Clifford Wong, as well as Lieutenant Joseph Turner. In addition, we had helping us Artisha McCullough, who is EEO and Civil Rights Director for the City of Oakland. We had City Administrator Ian Appleyard as well. We had Lieutenant Aaron Smith with the Oakland Black Police Officers Association. We had Sergeant Chong, who represents the Asian officers, Sergeant Michael Chong, representing the Asian Officers Association. We also had Sgt Trevino, who represented the Latino Officers Association, as well as Lieutenant Osmus, who represented the Lieutenant Lisa Osmus, who represented the LGBTQ officers. Let me talk with you a little bit about this anti-discrimination policy. And if I missed anyone's name on the ad hoc, let me apologize at the outset. Somebody please text me or something and let me know if I missed any names. But I want to thank them now at the outset for all of the hard work that they've done in trying to get us to this point, and all of the factors that we were happy to have, all of the things that they helped us to focus on and let us know so that we could have the best policy that we could. I'm going to ask, I wonder if Commissioner Jackson, if maybe you could monitor the chat, or Jesse, are you doing that? Who's going to monitor chat where I see some things coming in and I'm not
I'll
sure.
take care of it.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
All right. Very good. All right. Very good then. Okay. All right. With respect to the anti-discrimination policy, let me tell everyone what this policy is supposed to accomplish. The anti-discrimination policy ad hoc was established to bring to the commission for adoption a revised and enhanced internal Oakland Police Department OPD anti-discrimination and harassment policy that will contain guidelines and expectations related to all department members. Let me tell you as well that this policy is a workplace anti-discrimination policy. It is not a policy that's meant to guide and direct OPD members regarding expected anti-bias behavior toward members of the public. Those expectations and guidelines will be included in policies generated by other ad hoc committees. As indicated, what I'd like to do now is to just have a general conversation about the importance of anti-discrimination policies at work. And I am going to call on people, and I'll call on you in the order in which I introduced you rather, for what we're calling our subject matter experts. And that is Ms. Flynn and Ms. Massey and Ms. Thompson, Attorney Thompson. So why don't we start with you, Director Flynn? If you could, and yes, now we can hear you. If you can just talk basically in general about, why it's important that we have anti-discrimination policies within the police department, why it's important that we have them in general, particularly in today's climate. We are post George Floyd, which dealt with particular discrimination issues. But let's just talk about, if I can, and I will ask all of you to address this, what we can talk about and what we should be doing as community, as the city. So let's talk about you, Director Flynn.
I guess I may throw off the conversation a little bit because I'm not the discrimination expert on the panel. That's not exactly my line of work. I do race and justice and equity and justice work, which is much broader. And the reason that it exists is because the anti-discrimination laws and policy haven't done the trick. So I can talk about that. I think that they are important. What they represent, the fact that we have these kinds of policies and in fact laws on the books, is the result of many long, hard-fought battles of the civil rights movement that caused us to recalibrate race and racism in our country with regard to what was acceptable and not acceptable under the law. And that was a really important step, and it's very important. And I do apologize for my camera. I cannot figure out what's going on with it today, but it'll go in and out like that.
Okay.
So these policies represent our history of pushing back against injustice. And it was really important that we changed the laws in this country, because within my lifetime, it was perfectly legal to discriminate against women, against Black people, against any number of social identities. And so it's not long ago and far away when that was the case. I'm still here, and it used to be okay when I was here for that to happen. I'm about the same age as Brown versus the Board of Education, just full disclosure. So that was the tipping point case with regard to this kind of discriminatory behavior in our nation. And it was necessary for that to happen in order for us to build on it. And that's what OPD is doing now. We're refining the policy to make it better, stronger, more clear. And it's very important that we have those policies in place so that everyone in the department, and in fact across the city, knows where the line is and what the law says and what the expected behaviors are within our workplace. But when we do equity work, we flip the script a little bit and we say, so how's it going? And what we know is that the data is showing that it's not going well. Marginalized groups, protected classes is what they're called legally. Protected classes are not doing well. We're not doing as well as other classes. And so we know we need to do more. So the Department of Race and Equity was put in place to help us figure out what's not working and what is working with regard to what we're already doing to try to make our workplace more just and fair. So we look at the data and we say, look, we can see that women are not as equally represented. We can see that women maybe have a higher turnover rate or retire on disability earlier. We see all kinds of disparities going on in the workplace, not just in OPD, across the board and across the country. And so we want to take these policies and we want to make them as good as they possibly can be, and we want to work hard together to enforce them. But then we also want to say what's not working, what is not being covered by that policy that is presenting a barrier to achieving true equity. And equity is very definable. It is empirical. Equity is the lack of disparities based on social identities. So as long as we have these disparities showing women underrepresented, or people of color over-disciplined, or whatever the disparities might be, we know we have not yet achieved equity. So we take policies like this and we say, okay, this is a good policy and we are following it, we're enforcing it, we're educating people around it. Why is it that protected classes are still not thriving in our environment? And we have empirical evidence that they're not. And so my work is to work with the department to follow up on these policies with the data and to unpack the root causes about why the policies aren't having the impact that we want them to have, and to build into our practice interventions that will catch and interrupt things that are circumventing the policy, because that's what's actually going on. Policies like this have been in place for decades now, and we still don't have parity, we don't have equity, we don't have consistent life outcomes across different identities. So I get to work with these policies. So I want them to be written really well so that we can then go take it to the next level and say, so how come we still have these disparities? What are we going to do now? How are we going to make this policy manifest the outcomes that we were hoping for when the policy was written? So I'm really excited to be working with the department on this particular policy right now in this moment to think about how are we going to measure the impacts of this policy? How are we going to know whether or not it's working? And if it's not working, if we don't see these disparities closing over time as a result of the changes that are being made, what else do we need to do to make equity a reality in our future? So it's very future focused, it's very data driven and very root cause oriented. And we know that the policies are important so that we can start the conversation there, but we know we're going to have to go deeper. So that's my role. You're muted, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to turn it over to Catherine Massey, who will talk with us. You could share your perspective. Why are these kinds of these policies important, and how does it impact the kind of work that you do for the City of Oakland?
Yeah. So thanks for having me, first of all. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm an equal opportunity specialist. I'm actually in the city administrator's office rather than the city attorney's office. And I'm in the Employment Investigations and Civil Rights Compliance Division. And so our division and the work that I do is specifically pursuant to these policies. So we work to foster equal employment opportunity within the City of Oakland workforce. And to do that, I conduct harassment and discrimination prevention trainings for city employees, and I investigate concerns of workplace discrimination, harassment, and retaliation that arise under the city's anti-discrimination policies. So I really appreciate the committee's work to implement an anti-discrimination policy that specifically applies to Oakland Police Department members and job applicants. I think that reinforcing the right to work in an environment free of harassment and discrimination is a key component for fostering diversity and inclusion within OPD and within any workplace. And through my work, I found that that type of organizational focus on diversity and inclusion and discrimination prevention is incredibly important for recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce with high morale. And of course, in turn, I can see that having such a workforce, a diverse workforce that has high morale, can more positively impact the community it serves, which will hopefully, back to what Darlene was saying, help with equity issues. Because it's true that anti-discrimination policies have limits. They are here because of laws that provide for equal employment opportunity. And as a lot of us probably know, equality is different than equity. So the equal employment opportunity laws apply to all of us, not just marginalized groups. And they actually require that no preferential treatment can be given to anyone based on their protected status. So it's very different than equity, and it does have a lot of limits. What these policies do is, make sure that no one is treated differently because of their protected status. And when I say protected status, it's referring to characteristics people have that are protected from discrimination by law, like race, national origin, sex, gender, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, so on and so forth. It just requires that we all be treated the same at work, and that the terms of our and conditions of our employment are not based on our protected status. And we all have a protected status. So these policies protect all of us, which is great. But back to what Darlene was saying, that's why these policies have limits and may not always, have equity impacts. A little bit about how the equal employment opportunity field is changing. It has evolved quite a bit over the years. Like Darlene said, the equal employment opportunity laws that require these anti-discrimination policies in the workplace, the laws are relatively old. The California law, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, actually predated the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VII, which requires equal employment opportunity. But the laws have expanded, even very recently, within the last 2 to 3 years. They've expanded and to protect new characteristics people may have, characteristics that weren't always protected by law. So you'll see that the policy we're here to discuss tonight really embraces the evolution and expansion of laws and mirrors it. So for example, there's relatively recent amendments to the Fair Employment and Housing Act that expands the definition of race-based discrimination to, specifically say that people are protected based on hair textures and styles that are associated with one's race. And also, it's been expanded to specify that the national origin protected status protects people based on language, accent, immigration status, not just their ancestry or where they're from. So as we continue on with the forum, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about equal employment opportunity and anti-discrimination laws and policies.
Right. Thank you very much. All right, Attorney Thompson.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. Again, my name is Tanetta Thompson. I'm with the Department of Police Accountability as one of their attorneys, as well as the Director of Recruitment, in which I kind of oversee the hiring process and our intern program to make sure everything is fair and equitable and there's equal representation from all BIPOC, LGBTQ, Americans with disabilities, et cetera. So that's what I've been tasked to do. And the reason why it's so important to have these types of these DGOs that you have tonight, as far as sexual harassment and everything like that, is because what it does is it puts it out there, right? Something we've been taught, and just like Director Flynn said, this has been a long, hard-fought battle. This has been an uphill battle just to get basically a seat at the table and a voice heard. Yesterday, our our law enforcement cohort hosted our Black Women's History Month celebration yesterday, honoring Black women trailblazers in San Francisco. And I just found out yesterday that San Francisco had its first sworn female officer in 1974. 1974, right? That's pretty recent, okay? And the first Afro-Latina chief of police, a woman, was just appointed this year, Crystal Tulloch, Okay, so after all of this time in their 110 plus year history, the chief of probation is now Afro-Latina, and that is, you don't think that you would hear this today, but I mean, that's the type of things that we are facing. And I think the purpose of this is to have transparency, equitability, and accountability within the Oakland Police Department. And what SFPD has right now in their DGO, which was just revised May 20th, 2020, is the sexual harassment and discrimination general order, and very similar to the one that you all have right now. And it applies to all department locations, department sponsored training, and events as well. As also required per our Office of Racial Equity in San Francisco, we were all appointed. I'm also the Racial Equity Action Plan leader. So all of the city agencies are required to have a racial equity action plan where we address hiring practices, where we address how we interact with the community. And we're all supposed to report to our governing bodies as we report to the police commission. The San Francisco Police Department reports to our police commission about what we're doing to change the racial inequities and injustices in our office. And so what DPA has done too is even taken it a step further, which I think a lot of agencies are almost afraid to approach or to handle, is who were we hiring before as far as race and gender and representation as far as sexual preference and orientation, and then saying what have we done since and what are we going to do. And that's why it says Racial Equity Action Plan. So Mayor Breed has tasked all of the city agencies to not only come up with a racial equity action plan. We also are mandated to have mandatory training for sexual harassment in the workplace every year and be certified. That's you take like a little test at the end of this training, as well as we have our whistleblower program, which we all must participate in and get familiar with, that you've included in your general order as well. So that is what we're doing. And I think it's so important, especially in a post-George Floyd era where race has to be discussed. We cannot run from it. I know it's an uncomfortable conversation for some, but it's something that we must tackle right here, right now, and especially for the Oakland Police Department. We're seeing a lot of, especially nationwide, there's a fracture between the communities, these our BIPOC communities, as what through the police department. So we want to bridge those gaps. And this is one of the ways, is to have this transparency, to have this accountability, and to have everyone has a seat at the table. We have our officers for justice, which is our Black officers, be at the seat of the table like you have, the Black officers, the Oakland Black Officers Association. We have our Asian, Latino, LGBTQ plus we have. So all of those people need to be at the table in order to make this for representation and to have that equality, because nothing is going to get done if there's not equality and there's not a seat at the table. It just won't happen. And I'm so glad that you guys are facing this head on and are not running from it, because that's the thing. Nobody wants to address race, but we have to address race. And so I thank you all for having me here. If you have any questions about how we can support you or what there needs to be, what you feel like what needs to be done, I am more than happy to assist with that. And I just want to thank you all for having me here today, and for the department for having their different collectives here today as well to address it, and as part of your ad hoc committee.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Do any of the other three subject matter experts the other two subject matter experts, you want to add anything before we turn it over to Lieutenant Turner to walk us through the policy? Director Flan or Ms. Massey? Go ahead, Ms. Massey, do you have anything?
Nothing to add. I was just going to thank Tanetta for all her comments. Yeah.
Commissioner Harbin Forte?
Yes.
I was hoping that we could pose one more question to the subject matter experts.
Sure, go ahead.
If they have observed companies or departments across the country that are staying ahead of this curve, either by training or safety protocols, who's not in trouble? It seems like all of us are behind the gate. But if you have an example or, come into contact with one that you really appreciate, please share that.
I can jump in really quickly. And I just want to thank Director Flynn and Ms. Massey for their comments as well. That was really helpful in everything. Again, we have our racial equity action plan that all of our city agencies are tasked to do, and that includes how we're going to address race in the workplace, as well as mandatory trainings. These are mandatory trainings that every city agency, every city employee has to go through. And I think that's how you stay ahead of the curve, is getting ahead of making sure that you have those trainings. Part of our action plans is, of course, making sure that you take those action items and put them into place, right? They become more than goals. They become something that you have to do. And so what our Office of Racial Equity has done is they've created a template for us. We have due dates for different phases of the plans, and it's right there. And you can look at it. All our plans are published for everyone to look at on the Office of Racial Equity's website. And all the different agencies, from the fire department, the sheriff's department, the San Francisco Police Department, DPA, we all have our action plans up there. And what it says is what we're going to do, how we're going to use our internal resources, and then what are our next steps. And then the phases go is like, okay, what did you do with that part of your plan? How have you implemented? And I've seen something, I think it was the Department of Health Services. They actually have a little ticker on their the front page of their website about how they've addressed their racial inequities in their office, or what they're going to do, and if they've hit their goals or their markers. You know, SFPD, we've actually, one of our action plans was to create circles of support and safe spaces for primarily Black officers, especially in the post-George Floyd area, you know, and say like, it's okay, you can be pro law enforcement and you can be pro Black Lives Matter. You can be that. And so we wanted a safe space for Black officers to come in and discuss that, because we felt that they were in the middle, right? You know, of the whole thing, especially when George Floyd was going down. We had a lot of our San Francisco police officers, our probation officers, our sheriff's deputies, you know, feeling like they were in the middle. They couldn't speak out for fear of, you know, being, you know, accused of their Blackness being attacked, or, you know, that they're not really, they haven't sworn anything, you know, their allegiance to the police department has been fractured, and they're not looked as, you know, as a member of the police force, because they believe that Black Lives Matter. So that is one of the ways I think that San Francisco has tried to get ahead of it by mandating it. You know, you have to do this, and you have to present your plan to your governing body.
Thank you. Anyone else want to respond?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree with Tanetta that training is key. And yes, it's true. We hear all the time about a new case of workplace harassment, someone being fired. You know, usually we hear about it in the private sector, because that's what makes them the news. But it happens, of course, in the public sector as well. I mean, training on these policies is so important. The city of Oakland really in 2017 started ramping up the training on the anti-discrimination policy that applies to the whole city. And I think it's made a big difference, especially in reporting concerns of policy violations. So I can definitely see the difference in the number of issues that get reported and make it to our office for review, which helps a lot, because if things aren't reported, they can't be reviewed and they won't be stopped. And it sets a bad standard. So training, and this policy, it requires reporting. So it requires, you know, that anyone who's in a supervisory role, if they become aware of a potential issue that may violate this policy, that they must report it. So that's really key to training and reporting, just making sure that these things don't get missed. And then, you know, people see what happens, you know, the consequences, the employment consequences that can happen when the policy gets violated.
Thank you. Director Flynn, anything from you? Unmute, please.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that as far as I know, no one has cracked the code on this. These disparities are persistent. again, I'm looking at outcomes, not inputs. I think more and more jurisdictions are trying more things. And I know San Francisco is extremely active, and other jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And of course, Oakland in 2015 made a commitment to infuse fair and just in all that we do. That's a highly symbolic commitment, because because at this time, our disparities are as vibrant as ever. I'm just going to say that the stratification within our departments, basically having our marginalized groups or protected classes not thrive is still very commonplace. And so I think that again, having good anti-discrimination policy is so important to set intention, to make it clear what's acceptable and what's not acceptable with regard to behaviors, so that we can enforce that and reinforce that through training and conversations about that. That I'm just going to be challenging and say, at the end of the day, until the institution has decided it's going to transform itself, we're not going to get different outcomes.
Right.
It means people have to actually be willing to not keep doing things the way they've always done things. And for a long time now, illegal discrimination has been a no-no, and most people know how not to get caught or not to do it. Or if they do, it's very hard to prove the case and to get findings that drive change. That doesn't mean that it's not an important tool. It is an important tool because it keeps it on our radar, and it gives us a reason to talk about it and to reinforce it with our staff and so on. And we're going to have to go deeper and find out, why isn't it producing equitable outcomes? What else has to change? So I think it can get us more comfortable talking about it. It can certainly highlight it as being important. And I just want to say that we're all struggling. Every jurisdiction that I talk to or work with, and I get a lot of calls because I've been doing this for 15 years. There's very few people in the country who've been trying to do institutional transformation work for 15 years. So I get calls from everybody. Yeah. And I just say, just keep at it, keep going deeper, because we want to make sure our policies are right, but we also want to make sure that our policies aren't getting eaten for breakfast by culture. So what do we have to do to the culture to get it to embrace a willingness to change how it treats different groups of people? I've been Black and I've been a woman all my life. I still feel it in the institutional settings that I circulate in, and I wouldn't have trouble getting other people to agree with me. So we've got this more subtle work to do. It'll take a little bit longer than writing a good policy, but we start with good policy and go deeper from there.
Yeah, that's excellent. So what we'll do, so a policy is going to be the beginning, not the end. And so in terms of where we are with this beginning, I'd like to turn it over to Lieutenant Turner. I want to thank again both him and Deputy Chief Wong for being here this evening and prepared to talk and answer questions. But Lieutenant Turner, I'm going to turn it over to you for you to go through the policy, and then I really want to spend some time with hearing from members of the public to see what they have to say about it. So, but let's go through the policy. Turn it over to you, Lieutenant Turner. Thank you.
Lieutenant Turner, I'm about to give you sharing and share screen capabilities. I don't want to rush you, but I want to make sure that we have time to get robust, full public comment. So as much as you can.
Absolutely, yeah. And I am going to proceed, Chair of the Ad Hoc and Commissioners, on the assumption that most of the public and the people on the Ad Hoc have had the chance to look at your pretty robust website and look at these documents. So we'll go pretty quickly through this. And so if those of you who are familiar with the city's very robust Administrative Instruction 71, you'll see a lot of similarities here. But this is a policy that prohibits basically unlawful discrimination, harassment, or other inappropriate conduct based on protected status. It's very clear. And so what we're really looking at is, as we look here, a sort of general outline of that sort of prohibitions on retaliations, and then who the policy covers and where it applies, which is everywhere. This does apply to all our full-time department members part-time employees, temporary employees, and job applicants to the police department applies at the department, at the station, in the field, and then off-duty. Off-duty conduct, this sort of messaging between staff or something like that, or even actions or conduct where one member is doing something and another member is subject to that kind of conduct. So for instance, music or action, social media postings, things like that. And you'll note that the policy does cover all the terms and conditions of employment, including things like recruiting, hiring, promotions, terminations, disciplines, layoffs, transfers, recalls, leaves of absence, etc. So a lot of different things that are covered in here. One of, as you noted from some of the subject matter experts, this is an area of law that's constantly evolving. So we did take from the city's AI 71 the most recent list of protected classes that was augmented even further by our subject matter experts in terms of them giving us some language, which I think sounds like will be actually included into the next iteration of the city's administrative instruction. So it talks about and gives definitions, clear, real world definitions, including, as you can see, quotes, right, that where a layperson, a member, an officer who has only been here for a few weeks or something like that can see some clear behavior that would be unacceptable. Physical conduct, verbal conduct, visual, audio, etc. So really just gives plain language about what is unacceptable, and then goes into talking about the different protected classes and some of the examples and prohibited conduct. So we do have sexual and gender-based discrimination. We talk about quid pro quo, sexual favoritism, and several examples in there, which unfortunately, of course, are plucked directly from real world examples. Race, national origin, color, and ancestry discrimination or harassment, including prohibited conduct and examples. Physical and mental disabilities. Oh, and just one thing to go back. So as was noted by one of the subject matter experts, you can see including things like protected hairstyles. Physical and mental disability discrimination and disability-based harassment, including conduct and examples. Discrimination and harassment based on sexual orientation, including conduct and examples. And then you'll note, I think one of the things that we are contemplating is a explicit call out to the city's administrative instruction 71, which is a gender inclusion policy, just very recently available on the city's website, I think posted and made available March 7th, so just a couple days ago, but available on the city's website, and has very specific things about gender inclusion. Discrimination and harassment based on gender identity or expression, again with prohibited conduct and examples. Discrimination and harassment based on religion, including prohibited conduct and examples. Discrimination and harassment based on age, age-based discrimination, prohibited conduct and examples. Discrimination and harassment based on medical conditions, including things like gender dysphoria, HIV, AIDS, other medical conditions, including prohibited conduct and examples. Discrimination, harassment based on marital status or pregnancy, including prohibited conduct and examples. Discrimination and harassment based on military and veteran status, including prohibited conduct and examples. And then finally talks a little bit about confidentiality and some of the things that an employee or a job applicant or anyone who is under this policy would want to know. That the dissemination is limited, but there cannot be guarantees. Talks about retaliation, what retaliation looks like, the strict prohibition, I should say, against retaliation. And then finally goes on a sort of three-pronged talk about the complaint and reporting procedure. So of course, the City of Oakland and the police department is required to have a complaint policy around this. So there's the City of Oakland complaint and reporting policy, the Oakland Police Department complaint and reporting policy. And then I think actually in this version that I'm showing, I might have opened the wrong one, but we'll actually do have one that shows the EEOC and the FEHA, so state and federal reporting policies, which are also required to have by law. And so that is the extent of the policy. As you can see, it is very similar to AI 71, but again, with simple, plain language, plain examples of unacceptable and prohibited conduct as for all those different areas of protected classes and areas where we might see this type of unacceptable behavior.
All right. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Turner. What I'd like to do is to turn it over to the public, because I'm really very interested in finding out what concerns they have, what suggestions they might have. And I want to clarify one other thing for the ad hoc, and maybe Attorney Thompson can help us with this. You indicated that there's a requirement, there are safe spaces be created within agencies for the members of protected classes to talk about things. I'm going to just ask you at the beginning, do you think there's enough in our policy now to ensure that there are safe spaces for members of the protected classes?
I think so, especially with the representation on the ad hoc committee from the different groups that you even have represented here today. I think there is that opportunity. We shouldn't be afraid of them, of alienating or isolating maybe one group, because that group is for you. It is your safe space. And I think once we start saying like, oh, I don't want to, and we kind of almost had that issue where it was like, well, how come we're not, included in this group, right? Isn't that the whole point, is for inclusion and, but you need that safe space, which is why we have our Black Officers Association, Latino Officers, Asian Officers Association, LGBTQ plus Association for Officers. We need those safe spaces, because that way you can have a collective voice and bring that to the table and demand that your voice is heard. Okay. And you have to be around with like-minded people that are in your similar situated experiences, right? So, and I think that's what former Director Simley of the Office of Racial Equity, that's what she tried to do with us, is just to say like, okay, what's going on in your, you guys are all part of, quote unquote, law enforcement, right? We just so happen to be all Black women that we're representing, we were each representing our department as our racial equity action leaders. And, we were like, oh my, look at us. And, we have one, male sergeant too, that he was participating as well. But it was so profound, because we were like, wow, how are we tasked with our agencies basically to fix the inequities in our department, right? And so that was our safe space to dialogue, like, wow, they're always looking to us to fix the racist or discrimination policies that they've actually put in place, right? Wouldn't it be, more productive for you two? But again, we lend that voice about how we feel, how we're underrepresented. As a former prosecutor in San Francisco, I found myself being like the only Black and Filipino woman in the courtroom at the time, besides myself and probably the defendant more times than not, the only BIPOC persons in the courtroom at that time, and so in any given setting, including when we have a jury seated, right? And it's like, okay, how is it, that, we don't have that? And, that's why we have, organizations like the Black Prosecutors Alliance, we have a Bay Area Black Prosecutors Association, is because you need to have those groups so that you can have those like-minded, create those safe spaces. That's why we have a circles of support for our for law enforcement in San Francisco. And I'll be happy to share that information as well, because it's a great way to dialogue and create those safe space settings. And we actually have one coming up on March 15th. So please reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat to reach out to me so I can send you that information. And it's just about creating those safe spaces and demanding that our voices are heard and that you are following the policies that Director Flynn said. We have them in place. Now let's talk about it. Let's be about it instead of just saying, oh, well, we have it now. We're done. No, it's not done. Again, this is only the beginning. And honestly, San Francisco's Office of Racial Equity was only established, I believe, in 2018. So Director Flynn, yes, you have been that model. And I'm sure you talked with former Director Assembly about what was going on and how to push it forward. And Shakira was so great. We lost something huge because she created this, basically this circles of support for our law enforcement agencies. And we're not ashamed to say that we do meet, that we are talking about issues specifically to Black officers. Some people may say, you know, and I know that's kind of like, oh, you know, but that's what we have to do, address it head on. We can't be afraid of addressing race and inequities as far as, you know, our BIPOC communities, as far as LGBTQ plus, you know, those type of things, Americans with disabilities. We have to address those things.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is to hear from members of the public now. I see that some people have put some comments in the chat. But if you want to, and Jesse, I'm not sure, Commissioner Shay, should you read some things or just let people raise their hands if they want to add something? Or
I'm happy to read. I also see that members of the public have their hand raised, so I can start to allow people to speak. So this is that portion. Members of the public, if you do wish to speak, please have your hand raised. The first person who has had their hand raised for a bit right now is Millie Cleveland, and I will allow them to talk.
And let me say that we have a number of people who want to speak, and there are some comments as well that I need for you to keep. I'm not going to set a specific time limit, but I'm going to say a reasonable time, which in my mind is probably no more than 3 or 4 minutes or so. So please be mindful that others want to share their thoughts as well. I don't want to have to mute anyone or to cut anyone off, but I'm going to need for you to monitor yourselves and just stop talking after 3 minutes. When you get to 3 minutes, start winding up. Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Shay.
Yep. Right now we have 3 people with their hand raised, and Millie Cleveland, I am making it so that you can speak. Unmute yourself and please. Thank you.
I got it. Thank you. I have 4 short points I want to make. My first point is I don't see what's in this policy that isn't existing law. So I'm not exactly sure what has been created here. The second point I want to make, I'm somewhat disappointed when the question was raised, why is this discussion important to you and your department? No one seemed to address the fact that having anti-discrimination and anti-harassment policy helps to have a better interaction with the community at large. That your workplace seems to be defined as the police department's building. Your workplace is all of Oakland. Once you leave that building, you're in your workplace. So I'm somewhat disappointed that you think this is just about coworkers in a building. My third point is this applies to all the members in the police department. Why weren't other unions involved in the development of this policy? You have SEIU that represents dispatchers, code enforcement, parking enforcement, custodians, all kind of workers. And this policy applies to them too, but I don't see anything that says that you have met with them, and it would require meeting and conferring with those unions. Lastly, I don't think the issue is training. The issue has always been put forth as people need to be trained. Racist people know when they're being racist. They know when they say the N-word. They know when they're being homophobic. The issue has always been the failure to apply consequences to this type of behavior. So those are my 4 points.
Thank you. Let's move on to, unless someone wants to try to respond, we can move on to the next comment.
I can say something just to your first point. You were saying that there's nothing in the policy that isn't already law, and I just wanted to speak to why it's still necessary for the workplace policy to be in place in addition to laws. So of course there are laws there, and people can, if they feel that the law has been violated, they can pursue a claim through the courts or a state or federal agency. A workplace policy is really important so that the employer, the city of Oakland, can hold people accountable outside of the legal process. And this policy is actually much narrower than the law. It's designed to prevent conduct before it even gets to the level of violating the law. For conduct to violate the law, for example, for it to violate the Fair Employment and Housing Act, there has to actually be an impact on the terms and conditions of someone's employment. In the case of discrimination, or for harassment, the harassment has to be what is considered severe and pervasive. It's a very high standard. This policy has much lower standards. A single comment can violate this policy, whereas it wouldn't violate the law. And that allows the employer to hold that type of behavior, to hold someone accountable for that type of behavior, whereas the law wouldn't.
Let me ask you something. Can an employee grieve the department's failure to apply the policy?
Not best situated to answer that question. Probably someone who works in employee relations or the union would have the most knowledge about that. What I know about grievances is that things that are in the memorandums of understanding can be grieved, and I'm not familiar enough with the MOUs to know whether this is something that can be.
I just want to say, if you can discipline someone because they're violating the policy, then clearly the discipline can be grieved.
Certainly.
But my question is, if the department's management does not apply the policy, can that be grieved?
Let me ask this. I'm not sure that we're prepared to answer that kind of question tonight. But unless Lieutenant Turner or our Deputy Chief Wong want to try to weigh in on it.
They don't have to answer it, just, write it down and figure it out.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very, very much. Deputy Chief Wong has his hand up. Go ahead, Deputy Chief Wong.
I just want to weigh in a little bit on her comment and piggybacking on what Ms. Massey said. A lot of this policy is taken from our city instructions, AS 71. So it's a citywide policy that covers all the unions. What we're doing here is we're bringing that same type of language within the police department. So it's a little more familiar to employees of the police department. It gives us you could say a more specific grasp on accountability, because we have a very robust complaint and investigation procedure within our department. So for that matter, it makes it a little more, I guess you could say, personal for the Oakland Police Department employee. And of course, they still have the city outlet as well. If, as you were mentioning earlier, if they don't feel like they receive the proper treatment from the police department, they can still go to the city and of course still go to the state. So there's several levels of accountability.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Chief Wong. Commissioner Shay?
All right, let's see. Next, we have up Rashida Grenache. You have been promoted. I see you've unmuted yourself.
Thank you
Feel
very
free
much.
to start.
Yeah, as I put in the chat, I'm disappointed that we haven't heard from the representative of the BPOA, the Black Police Officers Association, because that letter of grievance that was issued by the Black Police Officers Association is what started the ball rolling in terms of getting this work done. It also gave rise to an extensive report that was commissioned, I believe, by the judge with respect to the negotiated settlement agreement in response to that grievance, letter of grievance. And so it seems to me regrettable that we haven't heard from the grieving party that set all of this in motion. And I'm hopeful that as you move forward to the next step of this process, that the Black Police Officers Association will be heard. It seems kind of ironic that they are not part of this discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grenard. Let me just remind you again, at the outset, I listed all of the affinity groups that were at the table in developing this policy. And the Oakland Black Police Officers Association was definitely at the table. So they have been heard from, as well as the Asian officers, as well as the Latino officers, as well as the LGBTQ plus officers. They have been at the table. And I think you indicated at the beginning, you sent a question about whether Lieutenant Smith was, who is in charge of a member of the OBOA, whether he was listed as a member of the ad hoc. He was. I believe Commissioner Shay advised you that he
That was
was
somebody else.
That was
that
not
wasn't
my
Ms.
question.
Grenard. Was someone said that. Everybody's been at the table. So please don't assume that we have left anybody out. We would never have done that.
But they're not here.
They are here. Lieutenant Aaron Smith is here. His
not
name
here.
is. He doesn't have to speak, nor is Lieutenant Chong, nor is Sergeant Trevino, nor is Lieutenant Osmus. They're not designed to speak. If you have a specific question, then certainly you can do it. But I do hope that we'll be focused on not criticizing what we have done and just accept that we have invited and heard from everybody who has who should be at the table. That is the way we do the work of the police commission. We bring stakeholders to the table and we talk with them, we get their views, we solicit their views. If they have suggestions for amendments, revisions to the policy, we do everything we can to incorporate that. And we have incorporated some changes and suggestions from the affinity groups. Let's go on then to Commissioner Shay. Let's try to call on someone else.
So I am promoting the phone number that ends in 1779. You are now given permission to speak. Please unmute yourself and please let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, this is Mary Vale, and I did submit some earlier comments by email. And a couple of points made by Ms. Cleveland, really, really important. OPD has a history of, you think of labor relations. Well, we talked to the OPOA. You have civilian employees, they're bound by this policy. Probably their memberships have been victims of discrimination and harassment. I noticed that there, certainly you need to, even if they don't have an affinity association, women officers in the department need to be consulted. And lastly, as other speakers have mentioned, the presenters, Ms. Cleveland, others, you can have the best, written policies in the world, but if they're not enforced, if victims don't feel comfortable coming forward because they feel they'll be shunned by other members of the department, you're not going to have the change that you're striving for. And OPD is a department that, a couple, 5-6 years ago, had both a sex rape scandal with cover-ups, and if the media hadn't exposed and the monitor hadn't found out, we never would have known about what went on. And then very recently we had the Instagram scandal, which was for the public, a 101 course on how OPD's current and former middle management just brush things off, hope things would blow over, the things wouldn't, the horrible anti-woman, anti-Black comments would never come to light. Like OPD does not have a mechanism for, when they have the right rules and policies, enforcing them. And they don't have a culture of accountability, and the traditional police culture, has the policy for lunch. So I really think that going forward, in terms of the environment for victims, and in terms of when violations occur, police management needs to be accountable, and they need to deal with it and, enforce the rules as they're written. Because otherwise, nothing will change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Vale. Any other hands up, Commissioner Shay?
There are hands, but I want to take on that point that Ms. Vale said, which is specifically a kind of multi-layered, but I picked out two parts that perhaps some of our subject matter experts might help us with talking about, which is number one, how do we lower barriers to reporting, right? How do we make situations or make it more likely that anyone who has been discriminated against or has been harassed feels more comfortable in making complaints, is more likely to make complaints, is protected when they make complaints? And then the other part is, to what extent does this policy or other measures make it so that we can have accountability for not just the employees that may be perpetrators of discrimination or harassment, but also their managers who do not do anything about it. I see Director Flynn has already unmuted herself.
Well, one of the things I noticed about the recent draft is that it has expanded at least in the realm of the police department, the realm of mandatory reporters, right? So when I had my previous job in Seattle and I wasn't a manager, people could talk to me about discrimination all day long and I didn't have to report because I was not in the management chain. Now, if someone calls me and wants to talk to me about discrimination, the first thing I say is, if you continue, I have to report. And so to the point that was just raised, I want to say that this is a very big problem because people do call people like me with titles like mine and want to talk about what they're experiencing in the workplace, but they do not want to report. So I used to be able to listen and give people moral support and advice without reporting. Now I have to report. So what that actually causes is for people not to talk to me as much about it because now I'm in management and I already have a mandatory reporting requirement when it comes to discrimination. And people know that and they've figured that out. And so they know who they can talk to and who they can't talk to when they just want some moral support. What I used to say to people when they could disclose to me that they were struggling in the workplace was that things are not going to change unless you speak up for yourself. But that's easy for me to say because I'm the kind of person that was born uppity, as my dad used to say, and I'm likely to speak up, whether I have the authority to or whether or not it's perhaps going to harm my career or not, because I can't stand it, but not everyone's built that way. So I think this is a really important question. How do we make it safe for people to report? Because it's fine we know that it's against the law to retaliate. We already know that. And that, by the way, the penalties for retaliation, I think, are worse than the penalties for discrimination. I may not have that quite right, but they're at least as bad, if not worse. So retaliation is not legal, but even just trying to get people involved in doing equity work, particularly Black folks, often will say, I can't get involved in that because then I'll have a target on my back. So if they can't even get involved publicly in doing equity work, how can they safely report discrimination? And we know that what comes back to people is not direct. It's not like somebody comes right out and retaliates directly. Suddenly you're just no longer seen as particularly promotable. You just never quite make the grade, right? You never quite get over the bar, and other people do, but you don't. And you suspect it's because of that. So that's why I think we need these deeper conversations about how does this play out in reality versus what we hope it will happen, will happen as a result of this policy. People are very afraid to report. They're afraid sometimes to even speak up about racism, even in a city where we have a policy that says we can all talk about racism, which Oakland has. So it's a real challenge. And I think that's that additional work beyond the policy in some ways to change the culture.
Anyone else, or Commissioner Shay, did that answer your concern?
Oh, I didn't. I just wanted to hear discussion. DC Wong has their hand up.
Okay, Deputy Chief Wong.
I'm going to take a quick stab at that one. Well, as I mentioned earlier, bringing the anti-discrimination policy within our department gives us a little more teeth, I guess you could say, because we have a discipline matrix. We have a very robust internal investigations process. So as Director Flynn was saying, we do have a specific manual rules against retaliation. And the one discipline in that matrix is a termination. And like you said, if you do discrimination, it's a 30-day suspension or termination. So it actually, you're right, retaliation is higher. And looking at the comment in where they asked what is the consequence of violating something like this, it's clearly spelled out as a violation of one of our manual rules. And it is a 30-day to a termination for harassment discrimination. And second time around, it's a termination. Right, so it's very spelled out. That's why when we bring in internal, it's more defined because we have a matrix that spells out what the consequences are. As far as the reporting, it's also a little different where most of the time a supervisor or manager has to report. In our case, if another employee, peer, subordinate knows of some kind of discrimination, they are required to report it according to our general orders. A fail to report is in itself a manual rules offense. Additionally, you can also report it anonymously. Right? You send anonymous. If we have an allegation that could be a manual rules violation, we'll investigate it even without a complainant. So that's several ways where a lot of these problems will be covered.
All right. And I see Lieutenant Smith's hand is up. Go ahead, Lieutenant Smith.
So I think that this is where it's important for affinity groups to make sure that they're advocating for their members, because the fact is that in and of itself, OPD will not just get better. It takes the advocacy of our goal individually to move that needle. The Oakland Police Department has not. I mean, it is in some ways a machine that will continue even after everybody who is working here now is gone. But in order to retrofit and severely acts of discrimination, as long as there are people in these roles, and as long as there is a culture. But I think that when we start to talk about the gray areas, that is where the affinity groups come in. The truth is, you will not always have, and particularly for Black officers, I know that there are Black officers who've experienced very blatant discrimination within the Oakland Police Department, and I find out about it a year later, and not directly from them. You know, there are things that I hear about, and so I'll follow up and find out that a person's been mistreated for the last 6 months. So that is, I don't think that you can sort of policy your way to a department that is fair and equitable. It will take relationships and trust and building trust to make sure that you see change within your department. And that's not even I don't think that has anything to do with leadership or holding officers accountable. I think the fact is that as long as you have people in these roles, there is a chance that things can go terribly wrong and people can be discriminated against. So I wanted to offer that because I think that when we're talking specifically about Black officers, you know, I think we have in every cross section of what we're discussing, this has come up since the very first Black officer was hired in our department in 1943. So I just I want to make that clear that, you know,
I think I think you froze a couple of times, Lieutenant Smith.
I know that the public wants accountability. And I get that, but there's only so much a policy can do.
All right.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, I think we got you. All right, thank you, Lieutenant Smith. Do we have anyone else? And I think that certainly the commissioners understand that. I trust that
Can
members of
you
the.
all hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Lieutenant Smith. You're muted now. If you can unmute yourself, please.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes. Please keep going. It's showing that your microphone is muted. But we could hear you when it said that you were muted, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Perhaps I can just get the last gist of what Lieutenant Smith said so that he knows that we heard him, that there is discrimination that is going on. There's only so that the public wants accountability, but there's only so much that can be done with a policy, and that it is much more than just policy and leaderships, but relationships. And I missed a point there, but I wanted to get that out just so Lieutenant Smith knows that we heard him.
Yes. And that we agree with you. I think all of the commissioners on this ad hoc and everyone on the police department agrees and understands as well that a policy can only go so far. A culture change and more accountability and some serious consequences for failure to do what is the law, the policy. That's where we have to get to, because as Director Friend said, this has just been going on for entirely too long, and there have not been enough changes that we should have seen. So we are going to do what we can to make sure that there is more accountability and that there are some outcomes, some positive outcomes, and that there are some changes. Ms. Massey, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to also point out the policy's confidentiality provisions. Just doing these workplace investigations, I've found that confidentiality can really help minimize risk of retaliation. The fewer people who know about the existence of a complaint, who all was involved, much less risk of retaliation there is. So I'm glad the policy talks about confidentiality. It may help make people more comfortable coming forward. I know, like we've been talking about, it's a policy and it, may not be followed by everyone and can only go so far, but I'm glad that that's in there. And of course, like a lot of people have been saying, retaliation is prohibited, and in doing these investigations, that's the number one thing that is communicated to anyone involved. A person who comes forward with a concern, it's the first thing they're told. Anyone who's roped into an investigation as a witness, that's the first thing they're told. And the person who's been accused of something, that's the first thing they're told. And there's a strong admonition about the prohibition on retaliation given to anyone who may have a motive to retaliate, which is, the starting point to prevent retaliation.
And I'll say that in my 30 years, almost 30 years on the bench, I presided over a number of employment discrimination, harassment, retaliation trials. And unfortunately, it was difficult in the court setting to prove. I mean, sometimes a jury just wouldn't find it, but I knew that it was there. But there are jury instructions, there's everything. But sometimes people who speak up just, they're not protected. And as Director Flynn said, then suddenly, although you were getting glowing reviews before, then all of a sudden your reviews aren't quite so glowing. And although you're in line for promotion, certainly that promotion, you're not a good fit. So there are things that will go on. And that's why it does take certainly more than a policy, but managers, employers, supervisors committed to enforcing that policy, and there being severe consequences for not enforcing it.
Right.
But yes, thank you. Let me, Commissioner Shay, are there others with their hands up? Yes,
Yes,
okay,
I am.
let's go.
I'm promoting Kathy Leonard to talk.
Okay.
You are now promoted. Please unmute yourself and let us know your thoughts.
Good evening. Thank you. Kathy Leonard, born and raised in Oakland. I think everyone has pretty much covered my feelings. And that is, my internet is unstable, so I have to stop my video. Enforcement is a problem. You can write all the policies you want. You can pass all the policies you want. But, as the public, we see that there are police officers out there that break the law, and there's absolutely no consequences. The rape scandal, the police officer who went up to the Oakland Hills and broke in someone's house, the police officer who lied and said that he didn't run a red light, and he did run a red light, ran into a motorcyclist who had to get his leg amputated, and it cost us $12 million. So police feel like they can continue with the same behavior because there are absolutely no consequences. And I think once there are some consequences, we will start to see a change in the department. There's no incentive to change right now. And that's sad. We have no faith in a lot of the police officers because we know what's going on. And they know that we know what's going on. And they know that they're essentially above the law. So we need to stop letting them feel that they are above the law and start actually with some serious enforcement to get some change in this department. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Leonard.
Thank you for your comments. I am now going to put the next person. Oh, I don't know what I did. Sorry. Next is Ann Jenks.
And can I ask, we're getting close to 8. Did we hear from Ms. Jenks before? Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Ms. Jenks.
Good evening, and I want to thank both the panelists and the commissioners for their work and the people on the ad hoc who did this work. And I want to apologize if anything that I say sounds like I'm criticizing the work that was done. I'm certainly, I think, criticizing the process. And I would like an answer to the question about whether SEIU and Local 21 were invited to participate in the ad hoc. I know that they both have some forms of BIPOC and LGBTQI, both members, and I believe they've got some kind of committees around that. And I'd like an answer to that question. And I'd like to know as well if the OPOA has seen this draft, if they've been involved in the discussions. More broadly, talking about my favorite hobby horse, transparency and community engagement, I want to let you know that there was a very well publicized and broadly organized event this evening on criminal justice issues conflicting with this ad hoc. And it's kind of part of, I think, the need for the commission to have a more robust process around community engagement, to have been aware of that kind of thing in terms of scheduling the ad hoc, the one opportunity that any community members were going to have on this. several people told me that they were going to be unable to attend because they had already committed and registered for the other criminal justice event. More to the point, I got the impression that part of the argument for not making this an ad hoc that has transparency, where, for example, people are able to observe the discussions around the drafting of the policy, was because it is internal to OPD. And as such, there was kind of a sense that the community has less interest in it than if it was a policy that impacts the community directly. And I have to tell you that it's my sense from talking to other people that community members, at least many community members, do believe that the internal discrimination actions that have occurred very, very recently, since 2017. I mean, great that there was a new policy in 2017. The Black Officers Association's grievance postdates that. The scandal around Instagram postdates that. And the stakeholders on those issues were the community, who either lost confidence or found confirmation of their lack of confidence in OPD as a result of those public events. And so the idea that somehow we would be less interested in anti-discrimination because it's internal to OPD, I think was just a misfire completely. I believe that this ad hoc needed to be public from the beginning, and that we needed to be, as community, recognized as stakeholders in whether there is discrimination within OPD. And instead what we have is well under an hour for community engagement and comment. And I have some very specific questions because I did in fact read the policy. So a couple of the larger questions that I have, and one of the things on engagement and transparency that I wanted to ask Ms. Thompson is, but of course there's not going to be time for this because this was not created to give us enough time to really hear from everybody. I wanted to hear more about what San Francisco does in terms of community engagement and policy development, because I think that this commission is still working that out and still needs to figure out a more robust engagement. And I have to tell you that in my belief, every time the community is more engaged, the process is better and the outcome is better and the policy is better. Couple of questions that I have specific to the policy as it's drafted are,
okay, go ahead, Ms. Jenks. I don't want to cut you off, and Ms. Thompson, I'm gonna just ask you not to respond right now. I want to make sure that other people have an opportunity to ask their questions. Ms. Jenks, if you have a suggestion on the policy, that's one thing, but we're not here. This is the time to engage the community. This date was set, we're on a deadline because we have to get this policy done and approved by the commission, and it has to be reported to the monitor. So we have some deadlines, and unfortunately, no, you're right, we did not check the community calendars of every possible organization that could possibly have an event tonight. But we set this meeting, I think 2 weeks ago or so, so that we could get it done. And we have invited, this policy is really no different from Administrative Instruction 71. It's 99% identical to Administrative Instruction 71 that all of the unions have been bound by and subject to since AI 71 was passed. So it's not something that is new to the unions or to the membership of the unions. There have been, to the extent there would be meeting and conferring, that would have been done with respect to before the passage of AI 71. So I just want, again, this can be a gripe session, or we can try to move forward and try to figure out what we can do. It's not perfect, never will be. And there will always be people who will complain about what we did and how we got to where we are. But today is a time for community input on this policy. And that's
so
what we want.
I'm sorry,
So,
Sid. think that.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm doing a time check. I am committed to staying on the line and hearing from the public and the community. I know that others may not be able to, but I will stay if anybody. And so I want to make sure that we respect people's times. You are absolutely welcome to stay on or to get on to other engagements, but I will stay on and let's go from there. Ms. Jenks.
We want to hear, but I just want people again to just remember, I said I didn't want to cut anybody off, but try to keep your comments to 3 to 4 minutes. And when you get to 3 to 4 minutes, let someone else have an opportunity to get their point across as well. I think there's still some other hands up. So
Ms.
I understand, Ms. Jenks, that you have 3 or 4 more questions that you would like answered. So
I'm very sorry, Judge, that you think that I'm turning this into a gripe session. I thought that my comments were productive, and that was
they were very productive.
That was the spirit in which I offered them. I'm also reflecting the comments of some other people, and I did wait to raise my hand to try to give other people an opportunity to go first, because I realized there was so little time to comment for the public that we were going to run out of time. There was no opportunity for public comment until the last 40 minutes of this event. So a couple
Yes, it's unfortunate. We could have done this without having any subject matter experts, and you would not have gotten to hear from Ms. Thompson or from Ms. Flynn or from Ms. Massey. And we could have just done it and just let you start talking. But we wanted to provide some background. That was going to take some time. We wanted to go through the policy. So, again, if you want to stay around, but I just want to let everybody, we did schedule this from 6:30 to 8. If there are people who need to leave, I would ask you to just kind of step back and let others who have some comments and who are on a time schedule. I don't know what the schedule is for our subject matter experts, but we have it, and I think we'll stay as long as it takes, but we're not going to stay until 9, 10, 11, or 12 o'clock tonight. Okay.
Ms. Jenks.
Couple of questions.
Answer Ms. Jenks' question that she asked of me, but then I would have to leave after that. But I can address what we're doing in San Francisco as from the as what we're doing as part of policy change and effect in San Francisco. What we do is we work with the San Francisco Police Department. DPA works together, and the police commission work on these DGOs and policy changes. So like recently we did our language access, as far as individuals who require language access and what that entails, and was very detailed. And different community-based organizations were part of the working group, DPA, SFPD, and their varying, sectors within the city, as well as a police commissioner were in charge of that. And basically how it works in San Francisco is that if there's going to be policy changes, a commissioner would be in charge of that steering committee or that working group. And they would get involvement from the San Francisco Police Department, DPA. We have a specific policy unit, which, addresses such policy concerns. So for us as well, we're actively engaged and have that unit specifically in that office. And so we go to town hall meetings, we go to working group sessions within the community to affect policy change and to make those recommendations to San Francisco. But again, it is a very collaborative effort. Did that answer you, Ms. Jenks?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. And I hope you'd be willing to talk to our commissioners about your experiences so that maybe we could get a little bit more transparency and engagement. I have a couple of specific questions about the policy. The language in terms of listing kind of the characteristics that it can't be discriminated against is one set of language, and the list that is being developed in the social media ad hoc is I think a broader list. And I'm wondering why not have as broad a list as possible and use it across policies so that it's very clear to everybody what that list is. Another larger structural question that I have is that there's a series of sections that are really very, very similar. In my experience, in terms of people reading documents, is that the more that language looks pretty much identical down the road. And the longer the document it creates, that I think that that makes it less accessible. And my question is, if there's a way to list separately each area and what that significance is, but then to kind of combine the language that's all the same, and that's sections F, G, H, I, J, K, L, and M. And I'd be glad to explain that further, but I think that you're harming the policy if you want officers to be able to read it and for them to really, engage with it and appreciate it. I was a little concerned at how narrowly defined harassment is. Under A3, it talks about no retaliation if there's been a good faith complaint. I would really urge you to say that there not be retaliation for any complaint. Obviously, if I file a complaint and it's fake and it's false and it's proven to be false, there's other ways that I can be reprimanded for that. But I don't think we want to tell officers that there's a test of good faith and they're going to think they get to make that test of whether it's good faith or not. I think that there shouldn't be retaliation for filing a complaint. Now, if I lie in a complaint, then you can discipline me for lying, but you're still not retaliating against me for filing the complaint. Under B3, I think that what's missing is kind of a discussion around bullying and some kind of definition that gets to bullying, as opposed to the 1980s, the definition of what discrimination was very much, were you going to be promoted or were you going to be told you couldn't be promoted? But what I think happens a lot more in a lot of workplaces is I'm a member of a majority group and I say that we're all going to shun Jesse, and I kind of tease Jesse for a whole bunch of things unrelated to his protected class. And it's just straight up kind of bullying. And I think there needs to be a way of finding some definitions for that are more clear, that's also encompassed in this. One of my concerns is that threats is referred to throughout the document, specific to threats of violence. I think that threats of any repercussions, so it's not only repercussions for it, but threats of repercussions. Because what I hear from officers is that they're told, I might just drive really slow to back you up, right? That's not telling you that snitches get stitches, but it's telling you that there's going to be some impact, and it's a vaguer thing. And I think that the idea of threats needs to be broader. I think that there needs to be in C2 a discussion of other conduct, such as withholding information, access to professional support. For example, a trainer who doesn't tell a trainee, and I'm not saying to put this in specifically, but find language that covers this kind of thing. Jesse's my trainee because apparently I'm bullying him tonight. And I don't tell him he's doing something out of policy, so that he continues to do it out of policy and potentially gets in trouble. And I'm doing that because I want to see him fail, right? I think that there are a lot of these kinds of aspects: failure to provide backup, exclusion, encouraging other members to exclude. And I'm looking for some of that language as
right.
In terms of religion. One of the kind of discriminatory engagements around religion that I think is most common is aggressive advocacy of a majority religion. So again, I tell Jesse every morning, let's stop and pray before we get into our vehicle. And I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And I keep talking about it. And I know that Jesse's a Muslim and he sees that I only talk about religion with him, And I think that kind of aggressive, I'm just going to keep pushing you on how come you don't convert. You should come to church with me someday. Nobody can say I'm threatening him. In fact, I'm loving on him just a little too much. And I'd like to see some of that reflected in the religion, because I do hear that from people who are Jews and Muslims or atheists, that kind of very aggressive, after you've asked once, you have to stop kind of thing, but something around that. And I'm very sorry, Judge, that you think this is a gripe session. It was not intended as such. And I would very much like an answer, and I think everybody needs to have an answer about whether this is not an issue of meet and confer. Members of OPD were part of the discussion, even though the community was not, and the community was not allowed to watch. We're being told that members of OPD were part of these discussions about drafting, were able to contribute their comments. And being a member of a civilian work group in an institution that focuses so heavily on policing puts you at a real disadvantage and makes you more vulnerable to acts of discrimination. And I think it's incredibly important that those people's voices be heard, not in meet and confer, but why wouldn't they be there during the drafting of this at the same time? And that's my question. And my question is, were they invited? Not whether they're going to be able to meet and confer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenks, for your comments and your suggestions, which are very good, and that is what I wanted us to get to. Give us some specifics about what we can do to improve the policy, and not talk about what's gone on in the past. And I don't mean to be a gripe session, but yes, we all know about some of the things that have gone on in the past and some of the embarrassing things that have gone on. But this is a policy where we're trying to address things for the future. I want to hear from Ms. Massey.
Yeah, just to address a couple of the items you mentioned, Ms. Jenks. So about good faith complaints being protected from retaliation, I just want you to know that all complaints are considered good faith complaints with regard to this policy. No one is ever disciplined or anything for making a complaint under this policy. All complaints are protected. So the term good faith is in there because that's what the retaliation law is. But the city, when it handles these complaints, considers them all to be good faith complaints.
We can remove it.
Sure, and like Commissioner Harbin-Forte said, I think that it's a good suggestion. I really like your ideas surrounding that, because it could, like you said, lead to people thinking, well, I don't think this is a good faith complaint, so I can retaliate. So I really like the suggestion. But I did want to communicate that the city does regard these complaints as good faith complaints and doesn't analyze that at all. And also, I really like your suggestions about examples for the religion category. Proselytizing would be considered, if it's unwelcome, would be considered inappropriate conduct based on religion and would be prohibited by the policy. And I think it's a great example that could be spelled out so that there's more notice about that. I appreciate that. And then just to your comment about bullying. So I agree, bullying is a huge problem in all workplaces. I hear about it all the time. This policy is specifically focused on conduct based on protected status. There are codes of conduct within the city that would apply to bullying. So there are other policies that prohibit bullying and prohibit abusive conduct that's not related to protected status. This policy specifically is designed to address conduct based on protected status. That's all.
All right, Ms. Jenks put in a note that her references were to bullying based on protected status.
Okay, got you. So yeah, that's a helpful suggestion too, to specify that bullying based on protected status is considered inappropriate. The policy certainly prohibits it, but appreciate the suggestion to spell it out.
All right, let's see, Commissioner Shay, is there anything from anybody else want to respond to anything? If
Mr.
not,
Pursley has his hand up.
I'm sorry.
There are additional hands, one
Yes.
specifically that we have not yet.
Okay.
That's Mr. Pursley.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Pursley, you have been promoted to panelist. Please let us know your thoughts.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Peter Pursley here. I'm on another ad hoc committee and was invited to participate in this one. My observation, again, is that the draft policy does not spell out consequences for violating the policy anywhere in the policy. Talks about how it applies. It's really very well written in terms of the detail of what it covers. But we need a simple statement that makes it absolutely clear that there's zero tolerance for this kind of behavior, which should be our policy, and we should state that, and that there are going to be consequences. It just needs to be said in the policy itself. It's not just something to read that's, an ideal philosophy of some kind. This is something that they have to live by, and they have to manifest every day on the job. And I think a simple sentence that says that would benefit the policy immensely. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Persley. Lieutenant Turner or DC Wong, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think Chief Wong will probably talk to that. But yeah, I think that's probably possible, referring back to our consistency of discipline.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Just a sentence, that's all. Yeah.
Right, that's a good suggestion. Any violation of policy always leads back to our manual rules, and violations are always covered there with discipline. But I think saying that any violation of this policy will be considered a violation. So,
okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and we maybe we put it in the first paragraph, command intent, put it as the last sentence there, that any violation is subject to discipline and as spelled out in whatever. So we might be able to do that. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts, or anyone? Who else? Commissioner Shay, who else has their hand up? And I really want to thank Director Flynn for hanging with us, and for Ms. Massey to let us know when you have to leave, but this is very, very helpful to have you still here. Commissioner Shay.
I see that Rashida Granage and a phone number ending in 1779 still have their hand up. I don't know if it is from before or they have new comment. I see that 177. Nope.
Is this a new comment from phone number ending in 1772?
Well, the only way to find out is to promote them and allow them to talk. So I'm going to promote Ms. Grenache.
No, that was from before. Sorry.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to promote phone number ending in 1779. I think that's Ms. Vale.
A new comment, Ms. Vale?
Yes, one more comment. In terms of the portion of the policy that talks about or will talk about consequences, those consequences should also apply to management, including people in IAD or a supervisor who receives a report of harassment or discrimination, not acting on it. Because that's been a big problem. It was a big problem in Instagram and also in the rape scandal. Try to bury things rather than acting on them within their role.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Vale. No other hands up? Commissioner Shay?
Just Ms. Granage and the phone number ending in 1779, which I think were from previous comments. I also see that Elise Bernstein has let us know in a comment that written comment that I'm having some trouble reading. Clearly, tonight's meeting did not anticipate the interest of the community in this topic, and all of the public comments are leading to a much improved policy. Greater transparency and involvement by the community in policy formulation always leads to a better policy.
I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You were speaking fast.
I was very much so. And
ahead.
all of the public comments are leading to a much improved policy. Greater transparency and involvement by the community in policy formulation always leads to a better policy.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that comment, Ms. Bernstein. Is there, so we're done. Director Flynn, please.
I just wanted to comment. I know that the commenters were calling out the union names, which makes it seem like a more formal process than just a who was involved in the conversation. And I just think it made me think about the fact that oftentimes people that are not sworn don't get as much attention in a uniformed environment. It's just part of the power dynamic. And so it was not, I'm sure it was not intentional, but trust me, there can be discrimination and negative things going on in those areas too. Some of those folks are going to be people of color. Some of them are going to be women. Some of them are, you've got your protected classes going on there as well. And so it might be worthwhile just to actually do a check-in, since that's kind of a captive audience in that they work for the department. It probably, I know you're on a tight timeline, but it wouldn't hurt to just do a little ground truthing with those folks if they haven't already had a chance to weigh in. I think because I do believe that participation improves product, who knows what they'll see that maybe we haven't noticed. And they are such an important part of the department. It's always good to validate them too, because I know that this is kind of a common theme. It's another theme that I hear, that, that if I don't wear a uniform, I don't matter. And I know y'all don't think that. I know you don't think that. I'm not accusing you of that, but there's a sentiment like that out there. So I think that was maybe a little thing, like maybe we could do something with that. Yeah, not a formal, not meet and confer, but just, we're working on this policy. It applies to you too. We'd like to get your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Great idea. All right, Lieutenant Turner or DC Wong, do you want to respond to that? The policy does cover all members of the department, sworn and unsworn. So thank you very much. If nothing else, I want to thank all the subject matter experts. I want to thank everybody who worked on the policy with us and to bring it forward, to get it drafted, and to bring something to put on the table for discussion. And I want to thank all of the members of the public who are here to give us their thoughts and their ideas. We got some very good ideas about how to improve this policy. And this is exactly what we wanted when we have this public forum. So I want to thank everyone. And what you hear from me is, let's not keep talking about what happened in the past. Let's talk about how we can make it better in the future. Where do we go from here? We start where we're standing. This is where we are. And what can we do to make it better so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past? And certainly more accountability, and certainly more comments from people, and inclusion will help the entire process. But we are going to get there at some point. And I'm still optimistic, even though at my age, I don't think that things will ever change. Growing up in Meridian, Mississippi and everything, from the old days where I saw the worst of things, it is very disappointing that we have not made as much progress as we should have made, particularly on the issue of race and ethnicity. So we have to do something, and it is a new day. We just can't accept the status quo. And we can't, as somebody says, hope is not a plan and stuff. We can't expect things to change. They're going to have to be some hard discussions and difficult discussions that will have to be had, and the paradigm simply has to shift. And we cannot stay with the same paradigm because we're going to get the same results, and we'll be here 10 years from now and we'll still have these same kinds of issues. So there needs to be bold and dramatic change that will have to be made in order for us to see progress. But it's ridiculous that we still have to have these kinds of conversations, and that there are still instances where there is just rank and open and flagrant discrimination against people. And as somebody said earlier, people know when they're discriminating. You know when you're being sexist, you know when you're being racist, you know when you're being homophobic. It's not going to be a matter of just training, because you get training through that. It just has to be a total paradigm shift and a total change in the culture. So I want to thank everybody who has helped us. And we don't always do things perfectly. We never do, but we do the best that we can. So, but we've got some excellent comments and stuff, and perhaps the department can also do some outreach to the unsworn members to make sure they know about what's going on with the policy and see if they have any suggestions. Okay, what we'll do, I think our next steps, and I want to tell everybody as well that if you have anything additional to add on the flyer that is posted on the website, it has the three commissioners who are on the ad hoc. My email address is bharbin-forte@oaklandcommission.org, and Oakland Commission is one word. Jesse Shay is J Shay. Let's see that's a typo too, at oaklandcommission.org. And Regina Jackson is R Jackson at oaklandcommission.org. Please feel free to email any of us with any thoughts or corrections. And Commissioner Shay's name and last name is H-S-I-E-H. So J Shay. And then there's also a phone number. If you want to leave a message, you can leave a voicemail message at area code 510-238-2187. So any of those contacts, we still have to do some tweaking and finalizing and some final improvements to this policy. So thank you, everyone. I just want to particularly our subject matter experts and for everybody who participated and all of the affinity group officers as well. Thank you. All right, we'll say goodbye. And Jesse, I think we need to any other comments? Was there a comment from Ann Jenks, the last comment or anything in the comment section?
There was a question and answer about grieving.
About
grievances that we don't have an answer here, but we're going to see what we can figure out.
Okay, all right.
I think that's it.
All right, and the unions were not explicitly invited to participate in the drafting of this policy, but I guess that's another question a number of people wanted to find out. So, all right, thank you all very, very much. Jesse, I think you and I need to talk again. Lieutenant Turner, everybody, DC Wong, Lieutenant Osmus, Lieutenant Smith, Sergeant Chung, everybody, and Darlene and Kate and Katie as well.
Thank you
as well. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.